Drive through the English countryside in June and you will see something beautiful. Rolling green fields, herds of cattle grazing behind stone walls, tractors crawling across golden hillsides. It looks like a painting of a nation that feeds itself. It is a lie. Those fields are increasingly empty theaters. The farmer who owns that land is likely losing money on every animal he raises. The milk from those cows is being bought for less than the cost of production. And the steak on your plate tonight, the one sitting in a Tesco tray labeled with a tiny Union Jack and the words "Farm Assured," almost certainly did not come from the field you drove past this morning. It came from a feedlot in Brazil, or a mega dairy in Poland, or a processing plant in Thailand where chicken breasts are pumped full of water, frozen into blocks, shipped across 2 oceans, defrosted in a British warehouse, repacked in British packaging, and sold to you as if it were local. This is not a story about food miles. This is an investigation into how the British food system was quietly dismantled over 3 decades, who profited from the destruction, and why the farmer standing in that beautiful green field is now the poorest person in the supply chain that bears his name. To understand how Britain lost control of its food, you have to understand one number: 60%. That is roughly the proportion of food consumed in the United Kingdom that is produced domestically. 40% is imported. That ratio has been sliding in the wrong direction for decades. In the 1980s, the UK was closer to 75% self-sufficient in food. Every decade since, that number has dropped. And the 40% that is imported is not luxury items. It is not avocados and mangoes and foods that cannot grow in British soil. A significant proportion of that imported food is meat, dairy, and grain, the exact categories that British farms are physically capable of producing. We are importing food that we could grow at home. And the reason is not that British farmers cannot produce it. It is that they cannot produce it cheaply enough to satisfy the 4 corporations that control the majority of British grocery retail. The first crime is the supermarket pricing model. The British grocery market is dominated by a handful of chains. Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, and Aldi collectively command an enormous share of the national food spend. These companies do not compete on quality, they compete on price. And when 4 buyers control the market for an entire nation's food, they do not negotiate with farmers. They dictate. The mechanism is called cost-price pressure. A supermarket buyer sits across the table from a dairy farmer and says, "We will pay you 22 pence per liter for your milk." The farmer knows that his cost of production is between 28 and 32 pence per liter. He is being asked to sell at a loss, but he has no alternative buyer. The liquid milk market in Britain is a funnel. The milk goes from the farm to a processor, from the processor to a supermarket, and the supermarket sets the price at every stage. If the farmer refuses, the processor drops him and signs the contract with a Polish mega dairy that can produce milk at 18 pence per liter because it operates at a scale that no British family farm can match, with labor costs that no British worker would accept, and with environmental standards that no British regulator would permit on home soil. The farmer does not lose a negotiation. He loses a rigged auction where his competitor is playing by different rules on a different continent. The second crime is the origin labeling deception. This is where the system goes from unfair to dishonest. Walk into any British supermarket and pick up a packet of bacon. If it says British bacon on the front, you assume a British pig was raised on a British farm, slaughtered in a British abattoir, and packed in a British facility. That assumption is often wrong. Under current food labeling regulations, a product can be labeled as British if the last substantial transformation occurred in the United Kingdom. That legal phrase is the trap door. A pig can be born in Denmark, raised in a Dutch megafarm, slaughtered in Germany, and shipped to Britain as a carcass. If a British factory then slices it, cures it, and packs it, that final processing step can qualify as the last substantial transformation. The bacon is now legally British. The pig never set foot on British soil. The same principle applies to chicken. Massive volumes of frozen poultry are imported from Thailand and Brazil, defrosted in British facilities, reprocessed, seasoned, and packed into ready meals and sandwich fillings that carry Union Jack branding. The flag is not telling you where the animal was raised. It is telling you where the plastic tray was sealed. And the average consumer who trusts the flag because they were never told not to walks out of the shop believing they just supported a British farmer. They did not. They supported a supply chain that is specifically designed to bypass British farming. The third crime is the trade deal architecture. When Britain left the European Union, it needed new trade agreements. Those agreements were negotiated under enormous political pressure to demonstrate that Brexit could deliver cheaper food and open new markets. The result was a series of deals that prioritized access over standards. The UK-Australia trade deal is the clearest example. It grants Australian beef and lamb producers tariff-free access to the British market under a phased schedule. Australian cattle farming operates at a scale that British farming cannot match. Stations in the Australian outback run herds across land areas larger than some British counties. They use growth hormones that are banned in UK production. They operate feedlots where thousands of cattle are confined and grain-fed to maximize weight gain in minimum time. British farmers are legally prohibited from using those same hormones. They are required to meet animal welfare standards that add cost at every stage, and now they are expected to compete on price with producers who operate under a completely different regulatory framework on the other side of the planet. The trade deal did not level the playing field. It removed the field entirely and told British farmers to compete in an arena where the rules do not apply to their opponents. The fourth crime is the subsidy trap. After Brexit, the UK replaced the EU's Common Agricultural Policy with a new system called the Environmental Land Management Scheme. Under the old system, farmers received payments based on the amount of land they farmed. It was blunt and imperfect, but it kept farms financially viable. The new system shifted the logic. Payments are now tied to environmental outcomes: planting hedgerows, restoring peatland, creating wildlife habitats. The principle sounds noble. Pay farmers to protect the environment instead of just occupying land. But the transition has been catastrophic for working farms. The old payments are being phased out faster than the new payments are being phased in. Farmers are caught in a funding gap where the money they depended on to survive has been withdrawn, and the replacement money requires them to take productive land out of food production. A hill farmer in Cumbria who used to receive a basic payment for keeping sheep on the fell is now being told he will receive more money if he removes the sheep and lets the land rewild. The policy is asking food producers to stop producing food. And while British farmland is converted into nature reserves, the food that those farms use to produce is replaced by imports from countries with lower environmental standards. Britain is not reducing the environmental impact of its food. It is outsourcing that impact to nations where nobody is measuring it. The fifth crime is the death of the local abattoir. This is the invisible infrastructure collapse that nobody talks about because it is not glamorous enough for a headline. In 1990, Britain had over 1,000 small local abattoirs. These were the facilities where a local farmer could send a small number of animals for slaughter, collect the carcasses, and sell the meat directly to local butchers, restaurants, and farm shops. That local circuit was the backbone of British food independence. Today, fewer than 200 abattoirs remain. The rest were killed by a combination of EU hygiene regulations that imposed industrial-scale compliance costs on tiny operations, supermarket consolidation that favored massive centralized processors, and a planning system that treated slaughterhouses as undesirable neighbors. When a local abattoir closes, the farmer does not just lose a service, he loses the ability to sell locally. His only remaining option is to send his animals on long-distance transport to a mega processor that serves the supermarket supply chain. That processor pays him the supermarket price, which is the lowest possible price, and the farmer has no bargaining power because there is no alternative within 100 miles. The destruction of local abattoirs did not just inconvenience farmers, it severed the physical connection between the British farm and the British plate. It made local food geographically impossible, even when the farm is 5 miles from your kitchen. Here is what this looks like in practice. A British hill farmer raises a flock of sheep on land his family has worked for 4 generations. He meets every welfare standard. He vaccinates his animals. He maintains the dry stone walls. He keeps the landscape that tourists photograph. He sends his lambs to the nearest remaining abattoir, 90 miles away, and receives a price per kilogram that does not cover his costs. Meanwhile, a container ship docks at Felixstowe carrying frozen lamb from New Zealand. That lamb was raised on land 100 times the size of his farm, processed in a plant that handles 10,000 carcasses a day, and shipped 12,000 miles in a refrigerated container. It arrives in Britain at a cost per kilogram that undercuts him by 30%. It is defrosted, repacked, and placed on a supermarket shelf next to his lamb, sometimes on the same shelf, sometimes at a lower price. The consumer picks the cheaper option. The farmer loses another season. The field stays green because he is now being paid to keep it empty. Here is the verdict. The British countryside is not a food system. It is a museum. The fields are maintained for aesthetic and environmental purposes, while the actual feeding of the nation has been quietly outsourced to industrial operations on other continents. The farmer is no longer a producer. He is a landscape manager paid a subsidy to keep the view pretty for people driving to their second homes in the Cotswolds. The food on your plate travels 3,000 miles not because British farms cannot produce it, but because the economic system has been deliberately structured to make British production uncompetitive. Supermarkets demand prices below the cost of production. Trade deals expose British farmers to competitors who operate under lower standards. Subsidies incentivize farmers to stop farming, and the abattoir network that once connected local farms to local plates has been dismantled to the point where local food is a logistical impossibility for most producers. The Union Jack on the packaging is not a guarantee, it is a decoration. And every time you buy the cheapest option on the shelf without reading where it actually came from, you are casting a vote for the system that is killing the farm you drove past on Sunday. If you want to know which specific supermarket products are most likely to contain imported meat disguised as British, watch the next one.